KAOS 89.3 FM Olympia. Good afternoon. Welcome to Parshley University. Yes, Kim is here, but we need a little engineering magic today, so I'm giving him a helping hand. At the outset, we want to remind you that opinions expressed on Parshley University do not necessarily reflect the views of the staff, management, or underwriters of KAOS or our license holder, the Evergreen State College. You've got a different opinion? Groovy. Send us a line, chaos@evergreen.edu, or give us a call during regular business hours, 360-867-6888. Having said all that, we're going to see if the gods and electrons like us. Are you there, Kim?
I think so.
I think, hang on, I've almost got, there you are.
Oh, there I am. I can hear myself.
Missed it by that much.
Very good.
Well, I'm going to let you take over because this is a candidate forum today. And first of all, thanks to both of you nice folks for swinging in to do this. Because we know you've got stuff to do and you don't have to. So let me get out of the way. Ladies and gentlemen, Parshley University and Kim Dobson.
Well, as John so nicely introduced, this is the Parshley University Show, and I'm your host, Kim Dobson. And we have with us Alan Miller and Lisa Parshley, both running for the same seat on Olympia City Council, position 5.
Good morning.
We need a little volume there.
Good morning. This is Alan.
There we go.
Yeah. This is Lisa. Good morning.
We've got our mic checks out of the way.
That's good.
Good. Hey, something just grabbed me out of the headlines. From Tyler Gundell, who's part of Just Housing, and she's one of the media spokespeople from that group, who's trying to get year-round camping permission from the city of Olympia, someplace in Olympia. We haven't figured out where that place is, but there was a fairly questionable arrest made, according to Just Housing members who were there on the scene. Someone came up to them just as now, there was no warning there was going to be any arrests, so they were willing to move if they were asked. So they were going to move off the foyer and onto the sidewalk, which is public space. So all of a sudden, this guy that they don't know comes up, and he's he appears to be kind of intoxicated, but it's questionable. And he starts arguing with the housing advocates and raising a ruckus, raising his voice. And so while they're distracted dealing with this guy who's kind of loud and obnoxious, the officer sneaks around behind one of the activists who's closest to the door into City Hall, and they grab this person and handcuff them, saying, "You're under arrest." And so the other 3 activists are dealing with this crazy guy, or supposed crazy guy. And and then there was one more arrest. So in my mind, it seems like they could have been asked nicely to leave, number one. And this is a problem in Olympia, is there's no place for the homeless. So, Alan, do you support a year-round homeless camp where people can get a garbage service, a bathroom, place to wash up, place to pitch their tent, and perhaps a shower?
Well, homelessness is certainly my number one issue that I want to solve in Olympia. I've been here for 35 years now, and it has become more and more of a problem. And I would support a camp perhaps as a temporary measure, but it's having people sleep outside is a public health issue. And so I would want to work with Thurston County, Lacey, Tumwater, and Olympia, my fellow colleagues on the Olympia City Council, to solve the problem, so that we actually, you made the statement that there is no place for the homeless to go, but there are places for the homeless to go. We need to lower barriers. We need to make sure that nobody is sleeping outside, certainly during the winter, and I would say year-round. So as a temporary measure, perhaps until we have the tiny houses, the shelters, the beds for the total population. But I want everybody off the street under a roof in a bed. And in addition, we need to have those services for the mentally ill, for the addicted. If people need a job, we need to help them find a job. But I think would only be a camp would only be a temporary measure in my mind.
Okay, fair enough.
And I can talk more about homeless, but I don't want to. I want you to. I want Lisa to have a say, obviously, and
sure.
And I'm sure there's other questions. So
there's lots more.
Yeah. So please follow up if I.
We could have a follow up.
Yeah.
So, Lisa Parshley, what would be your thoughts about this?
Oh, I'm absolutely for it. This problem of homelessness, which I think every candidate that I've spoken to, from the Port to Lacey to Tumwater to Olympia, this is an issue for all of us, partly because we're hearing from the people that it's an issue for the people. We're hearing from the businesses it's an issue. And more importantly, it's a compassionate and humanitarian issue. And if you talk to the folks that actually don't have a roof over their head every night, they are telling me one size is not going to fit all. And this is going to be a bit of an effort because it's complex to get to us being able to have a house for everybody, or a roof. So I think in the interim, yes, we should have a camp. I think I read just the other day, average human being creates 4 pounds of garbage a day, 2 pounds of which you could potentially recycle. You know, most of us that have a house or apartment, we can put that in our garbage can. We can put that into the dumpster. But, you know, if you don't have that access, where is it going to go? So if you get a camp, we allow a cleaner environment. We allow them to have a cleaner environment. Every morning I wake up and take a shower. I think everybody should have the right to do that. I think you should have the right to have a bathroom where you can wash your hands. So absolutely, we should get a camp with these facilities.
Yeah, that's kind of my feeling about it too. Camp Coyote was one idea that after all of the churches hosted homeless camps for several years in their parking lots, which was very kind, compassionate thing to do. So one of the solutions was they were going to build these small houses and find a place on unused city property to put these little houses, and that's been quite a successful project. People have a roof over their head who probably thought they'd never have a place. But unfortunately it's not very many. It's a few houses, and the problem is much bigger than that. And according to the figures I looked at, it looked like they were spending a lot of money on each one of these little units that seems like they could be built at a lower cost and still keep the quality. Just like the Portland Loo, I mean, it's a great idea, and I'm glad we have one downtown. But it was $300,000, and I think our wise engineers here in Olympia, in the Puget Sound area, could figure out something that would be equal at half the cost.
I agree.
So
yeah,
and I agree that Coyote Village is a great success story, and if we need to build another one, then let's do it. I have been involved in creating Drexel House, which is a shelter up on DeVoe Street, and I've also built Habitat for Humanity homes. So it's a variety of things to deal with. Accessory dwelling units allowed in people's backyards is another way to deal with it, but it's a variety. But again, having people camp outside for a long time is still a public health issue and should be at a minimum.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of cost for little housings, Detroit's done it with great success. They've actually reclaimed a lot of blocks and provided these great houses. Portland did it recently for the women that were on the street down there, and they actually engaged the architecture school down there to help them design and build it. There's a lot of creative ways, like you said, for the Portland Low downtown that we could cut the costs and make this a community-wide effort. And as long as we're not just focusing on one type of housing, I think that is a fabulous idea.
And the other question surrounding all of this, now that apparently Steve Hall gave the orders to arrest people in front of the City Hall Tuesday night. They came directly from him. Being the city manager, it gives him an awful lot of power. And I think that's one of my concerns and a lot of people's concerns, that Steve Hall actually has too much power and needs a check and a balance. It needs to be an elected position.
Yeah, I've looked at a lot of different city governance. Right now, our governance is a weak mayor, which is basically a chairman of the board, which is the city council. A strong mayor takes that position and is elected, or if you charter the city, you can actually have an elected city manager. I do believe there should be oversight in somebody who, electric oversight, the populace oversight on people that have that kind of position in a government. I do think that is a concern. But the city council needs to be the policymakers, the ones that actually set the tone for the city, as well as the tone for what kind of laws get passed and enforced.
Yeah, I think looking at city government and actually countywide government, I supported the charter efforts over the years to create a different type of county government and city government. I would love, if I could wave a magic wand, I would have Lacey, Tumwater, and Olympia as one city. I think we waste a lot of taxpayers' money by having administrations of three smaller cities and having one larger city. So looking at the city manager, looking at the mayor, having a strong mayor as a type of government as we get bigger, I think would be appropriate.
So would you answer the question about the city manager? Do you believe that should be an elected position?
I'm not sure that the city manager should be an elected position. What I would see, what I would think would be better would be having a strong mayor type of government, that the mayor is elected and would have that power that the city manager currently has.
Right.
So, more similar to Tacoma or Seattle.
Yeah, I understand Tumwater's Pete Komet is kind of a strong mayor. Mm-hmm. He does take that position, whether or not it's written into their city law, I'm not sure. But he does take that position.
Yeah, that's what he told me, that it is a strong mayor type of system in Tumwater.
Yeah. And with the fallout with Bryson and Andre, the two boys that got shot by Officer Donald, there's been a call for a program for a citizens review board, accountability board for the police, or in cases of excessive force or violence. How do you feel about that, Ellen?
I would be in favor of a citizens review board. I think that the one case that you talk about, has been litigated and been investigated and all that. Mm-hmm. So, but to have a citizens review board look at it, I think would be appropriate.
I absolutely think there should be one. Practicing medicine every day, there's a board of governors that oversees any extreme incidences in the clinic, and I think that anytime someone carries a gun and you have a violent action on the street, the citizen oversight is a very good idea, and it's protective for the police as much as it is for the people involved, and I'm 100% for it.
And similarly, the Bar Association regulates my profession as an attorney, and there are citizens on the disciplinary council that would look at issues such as that.
Yeah, in this case, the review panel that reviewed the case was, I think it was about 10 law enforcement people from the sheriff's office, from Olympia, Tumwater, Lacey, the State Patrol, and I believe there was someone there from the state too as well. I'm not sure. It's been a while, but in situations like that, there's the thin blue line where the police are always going to protect their brethren, and notably so. That happens a lot in cities, and so if there is a question of justice, oftentimes it gets deferred to those police panels which have no civilians in them. So the empathy gets lost there for the person charged. So
I think you should have people that are not in the profession, whether it be police or medicine or law, that are outside of it, that represent the people affected by the situation, and that would be in a community oversight. It's protective, like I said, for the police department, because if the appearances on the outside is if all the people reviewing this case are in the police department, there will always be the question, was this fair? If you have citizens of Olympia sitting on this panel, they will be able to say, no, this was reviewed adequately, we feel comfortable with it, versus, you know what, we're uncomfortable with it. So it's a voice to the people both ways, and I think it protects everything. So it's only wise to have those outside of your profession, police, medicine, law, reviewing your actions.
All right, thank you.
And I agree.
All right. Now, the other issue that always gets talked about is the question of the estuary or the lake. And I know, Alan, that you're a member of CLIPA, or you support CLIPA, which is the Capital Lake Improvement
and Protection Association.
So I think I may have asked you this question the last time too, but I know that Professor Milne from Evergreen is actually one of those that thinks that we ought to keep it as a lake. Can you give us a little bit of scientific reasoning about this?
Sure. As an environmental lawyer, I've been working with environmental scientists for years, 35 years, and Dr. Milne and Dr. Sewell and Dr. Ladd, the Evergreen State College professors that have studied Capitol Lake since the founding of Evergreen 45 years ago have, the environmental science shows that keeping it as a lake and dredging it about every 10 years is good for water quality, it's good for fish, it's good for the environment, it's good for sediment control. We have the most beautiful state capitol campus in the world here, the City Beautiful movement designed by Walden White and the Olmsted brothers, with the beautiful buildings up on the bluff and the view corridor out to the Olympics across the lake to Puget Sound, and Capitol Lake to reflect the buildings is it's recognized by people across the nation as the most beautiful in the country, and to destroy that would be, I think, an architectural and environmental tragedy. So the reason, so we dredged it in 76 and 86, and then we did an environmental impact statement in 96 that came out in 1999, and the current environmental scientific data shows that the lake is the way to go. If we were to take out the tide lock and allow the sediment and water quality that's going up from the watershed, the upper watershed out into Butt Inlet, then we'd have even more of an environmental problem, because dredging the sediments out in Butt Inlet is much more expensive, and So that's why dredging in the lake is the more environmentally benign way to go.
There is some concern that the dredge spoils from the lake containing the New Zealand snail are actually a little bit hard to just get rid of. The last time they did it, they filled in the berm in the north or the south end of the lake next to the freeway, and that became the solid ground between the parkway and the end of the lake.
Yeah, that was mitigation for creating the North Capitol Campus Heritage Park, because I've been the president of that group for 30 years. And
Great.
Anyway, the mud snail could be dealt with by either in saltwater disposal, because the saltwater kills the snail, or it could be put on the side and the dredge spoils could be dewatered and then dealt with that way. Actually, the studies done by Dr. Sewell and Dr. Milne and others shows that the sediment in the lake is clean enough that actually it could probably be recycled and used as a product, as opposed to if it goes out into Bud Inlet, where it would mix up with the hazardous materials that are already in Bud Inlet.
Let's give Lisa a chance to weigh in on this.
Being a trained scientist, I would say that the first thing I do in any issue is I look at all sides and try to look at the data and evidence presented, both financial, historical, as well as scientific. And I can tell you that after exhaustively reading both sides, I'm for the estuary on many, many levels. The first one being environmental, because that's the roots of my political activism in the 1980s. I would say that the lake is actually harmful to our environment. The invasive species, the snail, is not going to be able to just be the sediment that's dredged is not just going to be able to be put to the side. There are regulations that require it to be handled like toxic waste, which is very expensive for the city. The fact that we don't have good water circulation in that portion of our South Sound has reduced the oxygen content both in the lake as well as the South Sound, which harms the whole ecosystem, including up to from our crustaceans all the way up to our mammals. We do not have a healthy salmon run through there because of this low oxygen content. They're not thriving. And our planktons are dropping in numbers. So as an ecosystem, this is a very unhealthy ecosystem. There was never meant to be a dam there. It was meant to be an estuary. The best part of this is if we take the dam down, the invasive snail will be taken care of by the sailing that comes in twice a day. Lastly, environmentally, if you look at the Netherlands, we have the sea level rise coming. They've been telling us that we need to start planning floodplains. An estuary is a perfect floodplain for our king tides that are going to start inundating our South Sound and our city, and it's a stopgap for what we're going to be looking at. So environmentally, hands down, needs to become an estuary. Financially, we're not going to get away with every 10-year dredging. We're going to be looking at every 4 to 6 years, and unless we effectively get rid of that invasive species, that's going to be expensive. And then the soil, from all indications, the soil, having been the repository of sewage for as long as Olympia has had white people here, is full of coliforms. It's a very dirty soil. That's a very dirty lake in terms of water quality, in terms of bacteria. It's very unhealthy. I wouldn't let my dog swim in it right now. Lastly, heritage. I would like to think that the tribes matter. And what the tribes were here long before us, long before the Capitol was here. And I also think the original architects of the Capitol actually would not have made a full lake, because there was a little thing up the stream of the Deschutes called the Olympia Brewery and a tannery. They would have wanted to keep that in navigable water. So I would argue that historically that the estuary fits better with what our history is back not only hundreds of years, thousands of years.
Well, when you've got great scientists like Oscar Sewell and Dave Milne and K.V. Ladd of the Evergreen State College saying that environmentally the lake is better than taking the tide lock out, I'm a believer in science and I follow the scientists. And just finally, financially, I don't see how we could spend, it would cost $300 million to take out the tide lock and do all the other infrastructure that we would need to do in order to protect the estuary from tides and the, the Deschutes Parkway, the Isthmus, others, and so spending $5 million every 10 years makes a lot more economic sense than $300 million to take out the tide lock.
All right, well, short rebuttal, and then we're going to go to break.
Well, I think it's going to be a lot more than $5 million, and the reoccurrence is going to be a strain on the system as opposed to a one-time removal of the dam and restructuring. I do believe a sediment study does need to be done, and I think that's what the EIS, the state, is planning on funding here. We'll get to the bottom of it, and they'll have a lot of scientists looking at this situation, not just a few.
All right, well, thank you. This is the first half of the great debate, Position 5 and City Council. Everybody's going to be voting in November. If you have a Olympia address for several city council candidates running, I think we have 4. Yeah, and so I'm going to try to get to the other candidates here before this is over, but we're going to go to break now, and the preceding and following comments are not necessarily the views of the staff or management of KAOS or the Evergreen State College. They are the opinions of the guests and the hosts. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Parshley University on KAOS, and the conversation will resume right after this.
Do you have a particular set of skills that you'd like to share with the community? You can help by volunteering.
And yes, we're back again. In case you joined us for the second half of the program, we have City Council candidates, Position 5, Ellen Miller and Lisa Parshley. And we've been having a discussion about the homeless issues, the lake, police accountability boards, and there's a lot more to talk about. This city is very complicated, and there's a lot of issues that get the news time when we're looking at the Olympian, and I'm not going to make excuses for the Olympian, but sometimes they cover the right stuff and sometimes they miss it. One of the issues that is kind of on the edge of the city of Olympia right now, it's port property, and the port has just started bringing in heavy equipment, and they are doing what I call a quick and dirty remediation on the topsoil for the parcel, I think it's parcel 1, next to, I believe it's the Greenview Drive and State Avenue and Chestnut Street, where Moxley Creek is coming through a large culvert. That parcel appears to be going to be scraped clean, and they're supposedly having a soil remediation going on there. And the idea is they're going to put down a foot of gravel. They're going to take out a foot of soil, which in my mind isn't enough, and they need to do the cores and look at what's below too, because what's below, according to my scientist guest Harry Branch, who's been studying all this stuff, says it's full of furans and dioxins because that was where the Swantown Marina dredging spoils got dumped to fill in that area. So I guess I'm going to, now because this is port property, it's not really city business other than certain permits that the port has to get, because I believe the roads are actually city property surrounding the area. So they have some easements into the property. So I'm going to ask you first, Alan. Do you believe that doing a complete EIS with core samples and the the amount of dioxin, furans, creosote, and other pollutants should be made before any construction goes on there, rather than having it covered up. And
well, I can't answer that exact question, but as an environmental lawyer, I've been dealing with the Model Toxics Control Act since it was enacted in '86, which is like 3 years after I came out of law school. And I was an assistant attorney general for the Department of Ecology for the first 10 years of my practice before I went into private practice. And so I guess I would rely on the State Environmental Policy Act, the Department of Ecology, the geologists, the people that are looking at what is in the ground as to whether or not an appropriate cleanup plan has been adopted. There are appealability if people disagree, if there are scientists or that disagree with that procedure. So I don't know. I'm not a geologist. I haven't looked at these core samples, but I would hope and would rely on the scientists that are looking at it to come up with a proper cleanup plan. I certainly, as a city council member in Olympia, would want all properties that have been polluted over the years to be cleaned up if we are going to be using them again, such as the brownfield issue. So I guess without knowing more, there are processes underway that would hopefully make this a clean and protected spot for redevelopment.
so, Lisa, how do you weigh in here?
Well, I'm of two minds when you're talking about land that has already been, let's just say, destroyed. I would rather build on that land than on fresh farmland out in the country and destroy the green and the growing land. But at the same time, having been involved in a construction project just a few streets up, as well as a remodel down on Union Street, I worry on many levels. One, I'm not sure that's deep enough if you're going to put any kind of foundation on. I worry about what the construction workers are going to have to wear for hazmat when they're dealing with the land, because this cap they're putting on is pre-construction. It's not as you're building in a sub-basement and the slab for that building, as well as the pilings. What are they going to do to disturb that? I did go to the state ecology presentation on the East Bay cleanup, and at this time the groundwater is clean in that area. They are going to be digging deeper pits in two of these parts of this property. But what disturbs me with my chemistry background is when you start digging up the groundwater no longer becomes clean. What are we going to be doing to the East Bay if we dig this up? And have we fully thought this out? Lastly, this is in the floodplains. I think it should be an obligation of anyone who is building in our downtown that they provide plans for 30, 50, 60 years down the line, what that building is going to be like when we're facing, king tides every single day and potentially even longer. So I guess I feel this is just a little bit premature. I'm not sure we have a full information, and I'm not sure that you can get an accurate plan through EIS for every building, but I think it should be done, because I know that when you go deeper than 2 feet down, you're going to hit that contaminated soil. And what is it going to do to the people building, and what is it going to do to our groundwater there? And lastly, we got Moxley Creek right nearby. We're already worried about that channel of that water going down there potentially being an ongoing contamination source. What's it going to do to the aging pipes that water is running through if you're pounding down pilings and supports for a 3 to 4 story building? Are we going to further damage those pipes, and should we be daylighting that if that's the case, so we can make sure that pathway is adequately protected and protecting the East Bay?
All right. Just a little aside, Harry Branch, our water quality marine biologist who was here last week, Well, both he and I suspect there's a broken artesian well there, that every block in Olympia had an artesian well at one point before there was a city water system. And gradually as the city got a water system together, then they made everyone hook up and cap their wells. Well, some of these wells were in industrial sites. That was a plywood manufacturing mill and a lumber mill, and it went through a lot of industrial uses. And there was a haystack burner there on this site where Walker John wants to build their 58-unit apartment and retail space. So there is fresh water there that's year-round, and it's quite wet there right now. But the strange part about what they're doing is they're working on capping the area that's next to Moxley, which is the one environmentalists wanted daylight, and turn back into a eelgrass estuary. And so that will take permission from the city council and the port commissioners, and currently there's not enough support for that with the current commissioners and current city council people.
Well, I would be in favor of daylighting Moxley Creek and using as many of our artesian wells that are available to use. I would love to see one of the concepts for the isthmus is to have an artesian well there. There used to be an artesian pipe that poked out of Capitol Lake.
I remember that too.
And so it'd be nice to reconstitute that up across from the Eastern Washington Butte.
Heritage, Heritage Park and Enterprise Services had that capped because they said it was wasting the aquifer, having it running there.
It was part of ecology.
Yeah.
Well, I'm 100% for daylighting Moxley Creek because when I went to that meeting, it was disturbing to know that we have an ongoing dioxin contamination source, and they eliminated pretty much the peninsula there with Swantown as being the likely source. So the only other location would be that creek, and so I know that the East Bay is even dirtier than the West Bay, and we need to get that cleaned up. And I also know that it has a lot more problems with oxygenation, and opening up that estuary, tiny little estuary at Moxley Creek would be fantastic. It would also be a center point park. You can imagine that running right through town. So if you do that building there that the port's proposing, we limit our ability to do anything with Moxley Creek to a degree because all of a sudden we have a building sitting right there running right along where the stream is, and I think that should also be a consideration. And
decided to approve Walker John's proposal. Excuse me. They didn't like the EIS that the Department of Ecology did on that site some years ago. I think it was around 96. So they brought in their own, how would you say, contractors to come in and do testing, which came out with more favorable results for the port's building plans. So I personally feel like an actual in-depth study of that site is being thwarted by the port's current management.
Well, I'm a collaborator, and I in my practice of law, I try to find win-win solutions, and I would hope that when this, if this building goes forward, that through the design that we are able to, both daylight Moxley Creek and have a nice building down there. So let's, I'm an optimist that we can do that type of thing, and we have, we do have a track record of doing that in Olympia.
Well, I see Bill McGregor is one of your supporters in the PDC. He's giving you money.
I don't really pay attention to who's giving me money. Yeah. All I know is I think my treasurer's told me that I've raised about $12,000 from about 125 different individuals, and I don't pay attention to who's giving me money.
Well, you have an interesting mix of conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats. So.
Good. That's the way we ought to be.
Yeah. So, anyway, moving right along. One of the other things that I think is an important question is Now, market rate construction is the buzzword downtown. Now, infilling on parking lots and empty lots appears to be going on quite rapidly. There's a new one right off of 5th Street, right near, that's the next block up from the Capitol Theater.
Right.
So across from the old train station, which was Olympic Outfitters for a while.
It's now the pet store.
One thing that has concerned me is the city seemed to be rushing to give these developers 8-year vacations from property taxes, which in my mind, the property taxes are what helps pay for the services and utilities and the impacts on the city. And these 8-year vacations on these new projects is going to be stressing out the city's coffers. So, but I'm going to ask this as a two-part question. So, do you support these 8-year vacations on property taxes for new development downtown and for market rate housing?
What I don't know if I support that or not, but what I would support is a requirement that developers include in any market rate housing facility low-income housing, so that we can help with the homeless issue. And if they did that, then maybe a property tax break would be appropriate. So I want to increase all levels of housing in downtown and throughout the city with the 20,000 more people that are becoming over the next 20 years. So if that type of incentive is necessary to create low-income housing in a market rate housing project, that's what I would work toward as a city council member.
That was going to be my next question. Would you support the same housing? Because honestly, I don't believe developers building market rate are going to want low-income housing in the same building. We're talking about two different projects.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I do believe that they will not want that, and their definition of low income housing is very different than mine and the average person. Their definition is 10% below market rate, which is not affordable for someone making less than $15 an hour, especially if you calculate a 30% of your income should go to your housing. The average person making $15 an hour would be able to afford only about $500 to $600 a month, and when we give tax breaks without putting some kind of stipulation on that they provide low-income housing that is based on the median income of a community like they've done in Seattle, we're allowing them to set their own definition of low-income housing. So I'm a little concerned that, one, we're doing this, and two, we're rushing a lot of development without a full plan for low-income housing as well as green sustainable building and plans for our climate change coming up.
So I would, in addition, make sure that if they don't want to put low-income housing in, and low-income housing as the city council would define it, not as the developer would define it, then they should put money in a fund to provide for a separate project for low-income housing. I think they're doing that in Seattle, and I think that would be a good model to follow.
My issue would be is that if you're looking at, this is all interconnected. Everything in the city is interconnected. We're an ecosystem, financial, social, and environmental. And my issue is that if we make it so unaffordable for people to live downtown, if you're working downtown, you're driving or taking a bus or traveling a distance, we need to make it so that we have all levels and not just put into a fund and actually rebuild somewhere outside of the downtown area. We need to make it so that the folks that actually have jobs downtown can live downtown.
Yeah. We're running up towards the end of our allotted time here because we have another, 10 minutes? All right.
So again, I agree with Lisa that the downtown housing, low income should low-income housing should be put downtown, but we should spread the housing, tiny houses and accessory dwelling units and infill throughout the city. But we do need to, for the 5,000 people that are coming downtown, we need to make sure that there are all levels of housing affordable to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, so you would support making tiny houses accessory units on city building lots then?
I would, yeah. I think we should be creative in our growth. It should be high density, and tiny houses provides a unique, different kind of appearance than just a multi-family apartment building. I think we should go and keep Olympia unique that way, and I think we should approach it on all different levels. And I think we should also be keeping an eye on what's going to happen by 2035, 2050 with constant flooding of our downtown, and we should be moving up into the area towards the Capitol and out towards Union in some of these new developments.
Yeah, I guess there's probably one other issue we have time for here. I'm kind of waiting for signals here from my engineer. At any rate, so would you both support a minimum wage of $15 an hour, or do we have that already?
I totally support it. As a matter of fact, my businesses have a $15 an hour minimum wage, and I actually worry that's not going to be enough in the next 5 to 10 years. It's the way the inflation's going and cost of living. I think at minimum we need to get to 15.
Yes, I also pay $15 an hour a minimum at my business, and I think that we need to incrementalize the minimum wage and keep it so that it is tied to the cost of living, so that people are able to have a living wage.
I think the example is Seattle, where they've passed that law, but it is a ramped proposal. Starts out at 13 and it's moving up every year until they hit 15. I'm not sure how fast, but I think the result is positive. Businesses say there is a mixed voices out there, but most businesses say it's quite possible, and it's working for them.
It absolutely works for me. We have over 40 employees, and on many levels, if you're a small business owner and you have a constant turnover of employees because they're not making enough, they're not being treated well, your product goes down. But if your people are happy and they feel respected and they have a good living wage, they're going to stay with you. And so it's just a win-win. And then you put more money out into your community because people actually have money in their pocket to spend, so the whole economy goes up. It's a whole thing for the community. Totally positive.
When poor people have money, they spend it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you've got to spend it or you don't live.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I guess there is one other question. There's lots of questions. But the question of do you both support Planned Parenthood?
Absolutely. I'm 100% behind Planned Parenthood.
I do as well.
Well, those are two good answers. I wasn't expecting an argument there. It looks like I've covered just about all of my questions here.
Well, can I jump in then, old friend?
Sure.
Just briefly, because we are getting down to the wires, do forgive me. If I could have from each of you roughly 2 minutes on what differentiates you two. Because I see a lot of places where you are on the same page. I see a lot of places where you're not, but I don't know how clear that is to the average listener voter. And if we can start with the contender, and then we'll come into the incumbent.
Actually, we're both contenders.
Well, then good. Hey, Alan, try it. You first.
Well, we can have Lisa go first. That's fine. But this is the open seat. There is no incumbent.
My apologies. I'm in Lacey now, and I kind of forget these things.
Why don't you go ahead, Alan?
Okay. Well, I think it's my experience is what differentiates me from Lisa mostly. I have been in town for 35 years. I've raised 3 successful children, through the Olympia High School, and on to bigger things, and I have been on the school board, been elected twice to the school board, and was instrumental in creating the Olympia Regional Learning Academy, which is the greenest school building in the state of Washington, and a great success, and other things, of course, on the school board. And I have been on the Planning Commission, ended up being the chair of the Planning Commission, led the Downtown Housing Task Force for that, and spent 8 years on the Planning Commission, and I led the effort not only to pass the school bond, but also the parks bond that created the Metropolitan Parks District, so we were able to buy the LBA Woods property and other properties, Kaiser Heights and other properties, and hopefully the Capitol Center building and take it down, which has been supported by the people of Olympia for years and years. So I think it just comes down to my experience in being a servant of the people of Olympia for 35 years.
And Lisa?
Yes, this is actually a very good question, because I've been asked, you're just a veterinarian, why should you be a city councilor? Well, you're never just a veterinarian. You have to work in a profession, you have to work with people, but it goes beyond that. I actually hold 2 advanced degrees. I have been working for my profession for over 15 years, both at the national level. I've worked with the FDA, USDA, the Congress. I have served our state as the state Washington State Veterinary Medical Association president for the last 2 years. I've been on the executive board for the Washington State Veterinary Medical Association for the last 7 years. I have served on the State Hazardous Drug Advisory Committee, which helped write the regulation after the legislature passed the law that protects employees and workers who handle these drugs. I currently run 2 small businesses. I have an invested interest in this city. I have the ability to work in councils and committees. I've been doing it for over 15 years. I see this as no different than any of those experiences. I've worked with the government. I understand it. But I think even a bigger difference between Alan and me is I see this as a we. This is a community. This is a village effort. We've got a lot of problems facing Olympia. It is going to be a we. All of us are going to have to work together. We're going to have to listen to each other, actively listen to each other to get over the issues and problems we have facing us.
Well, I thank you both. And Kim, thank you for being in there so I could do this in here.
Yeah, and thank you for engineering. It's a mutual appreciation.
You have been listening to Parallel University. Today, a discussion of Position 5, Olympia City Council. A quick reminder, opinions expressed were not those of KAOS or the Evergreen State College. Stick around. Coming up in just 5 short minutes, Music Department Live, and Kim will be back at you next week with Parallel University. Take care.
This land is your land. This land is my land.
To learn more about Lisa Parshley, visit her website at lisaforolympia.com. Paid for by the Committee to elect Lisa Parshley for Olympia City Council, Position 5.